So happy you're going to be here. We're just going to give another minute to let some folks get into the room. Thanks for being here. Okay, everyone, we're going to get started now. Thank you so much for being here. So this is NCLR's end of the year sort of state of the movement briefing. So thank you so much for joining us. At the end of the year, we like to give an update, and this serves as our own sort of state of the movement. We want to take some time to explain what we're up against, what we're doing now, and what we see in the future. And I don't have to tell you all what a dangerous time we're in. We're all fighting for our lives, and that is to the backdrop of our fight for democracy. We're in a time when making voting possible and accessible for everyone is a political issue. We're at a time when there's an attack on our education system, and it creates a world where LGBTQ folks, people of color, women, folks with disabilities, folks that have immigrated to this country, and so many more are being left out of history books. And the damage done by this is enduring. Not only do we not see the amazing contributions that we have to the world, but others don't get to see our magic either. And this perpetuates a world that's worse for everyone. All over the country and all over the world, we see an uptick in violence for just being who we are. And we know why this is possible. It's easy to rally around hate and injustice. And it's easy for people to think that more freedom and justice for some mean less for you. But we can't give them more credit than they deserve. Folks that think like this and folks that are these anti-LGBTQ bills, these aren't coming from individuals. They're not coming from the states. They are coming from a small number of coordinated, well-resourced anti-LGBTQ, anti-democracy interest groups. But what we have to remember is that there's a small number of them. Most people, they think like us, not like them. And it's being armed with this knowledge that's illuminated our path forward. Because the truth is, we have been here before. The fight for civil rights and social justice, it's not a new one. And we are always on the defensive because we're fighting for a new and better future that includes more of us. But being on the defensive means that we're the ones educating. Many people find out about inequality and discrimination because there are those of us that are pushing back, saying no, saying that we can do better. But the other side is that means that we aren't the one creating the narrative. But that got us thinking, how have we won before? For instance, what lessons did we learn from our fight for marriage equality? Well, we learned that we all need to fight together. And right now, I sit at the leadership of 3 tables focused on coordinating our movement-wide strategy so that even when we're outspent, that we put together the most thoughtful and cost-efficient strategy to keep the most of us safe. But not just me, everyone on this panel and throughout NCLR sits at tables or leads groups focused on how we can work together. Often NCLR is the only LGBTQ organization at these tables. But you know what else the fight for marriage equality taught us? It taught us that when public opinion starts to shift, that is when we start to win cases. And so this year we made a huge leap forward and we released the largest public education campaign in NCLR's history. Over the past year, we've been working with Edelman, the largest PR firm in the world, to create a campaign designed not only to speak to folks that think like us, but to change the hearts and minds of folks that are soon to think like us. Stay until the end because we're going to show this beautiful 2-minute video that serves as a thank you from trans kids to their parents. And that's how we're going to win this. We're going to win with thoughtful strategy. We're going to learn from the past, and we're going to look across movements. And while it's true that we're in an unprecedented time, it's also true that we've never been here, and we're going to use that to our advantage. So today you're going to hear about what we're doing across the organization and what we see in our future. We're joined by Federal Policy Director Julie Gonen, Senior Youth Policy Counsel Danny King, Legal Director Shannon Minter, Senior Staff Attorney Amy Whelan. In just a moment, we're going to get started, but I want to remind you that the chat is open. We've embedded answers to the questions that we received ahead of time in this presentation, but if you do have a question, use the chat function. The panelists can see it, and we will respond to them as they come in. And with that, we are going to get started. So Amy, we're going to start with you. NCLR recently filed a cert petition, which means we've asked the Supreme Court to hear our case. Given the makeup of the Supreme Court and some recent decisions, there was some concern about that. Can you explain a bit more about our strategy around this and some of the other litigation we're working on?
Yes, and thank you so much, Amani, and thank you everybody else for being on this call with us. We love these calls and these updates that we can give. I'm a senior staff attorney at NCLR, and as Amani mentioned, several of our recent cases here challenge anti-LGBTQ laws passed by states around the country. We've seen a rash of these laws for many years, and we have often defeated them even before they're passed. But in the last couple of years, they have succeeded in an alarming way, putting LGBTQ families and their people and their families at risk. And this is particularly true of the laws that focus on transgender kids. So there are three main categories of these laws. NCLR has cases about all of these, but I'm going to talk about our Kentucky case in a second. The three categories are bans on transgender kids playing school sports, laws that prohibit teachers and other adults in schools from supporting LGBTQ children or kids or even talking about them in a positive way, and laws that ban medical care for transgender adolescents, including some that actually criminalize parents and doctors. So I'm going to talk today about our Kentucky medical ban case. In 2023, this year, Kentucky passed a blanket ban on the use of puberty blocking and hormone medication for transgender adolescents. The law prohibits these treatments even if the patients, their parents, and their doctors all agree that the treatment is vital to the adolescent's health and well-being. We sued the state on behalf of 7 transgender children and their parents, and we quickly moved to preliminarily halt the law while we litigate the rest of the case, which is called a motion for a preliminary injunction. In June of this year, the district court judge granted that motion and put Kentucky's law on hold. Kentucky then appealed that order to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals at about the same time that the state of Tennessee appealed a similar order in that state. So the appeals court combined those two cases and reversed the district court orders. And its reasoning was that the medical bans should be subject to only rational basis review, which is the lowest level of constitutional scrutiny. And under this review, the appeals court said it would defer to the legislators who passed the law and not to parents or medical experts or even the trial court's findings about the harms that would result from laws like this. So that decision directly conflicts with another appellate court decision that strikes down Arkansas's medical ban in the Eighth Circuit. So a little more than a month ago, we asked the US Supreme Court to review that Kentucky decision because of the very serious issues involved, including parents' constitutional rights to direct the medical treatment of their own children, and also this broader question of what level of constitutional scrutiny applies to laws that target transgender people. So as Amani said, we've gotten questions about this and there are concerns. Why do this now? Why do this with this court? But really, it's only a matter of time before this issue reaches the Supreme Court. There are more than 20 states at this point that have passed these bans. And so this issue is going to the court, whether NCLR asks the court to take it or not. It might be this year, it might be next year. We don't know when, but it will reach the court. And so it's more strategic for us to pick our case. And despite the number of states that have passed these bans, laws like this are really unprecedented in our nation's history. States do not generally step in to ban medical care for groups of people, and these laws put young people at significant risk of harm. So we couldn't just do nothing. There's also a fear that if we don't address these laws now, there's really no question that they will spread even further and that states will try to go further, including, and they've already done this, by trying to ban healthcare even for adults as well. So that's kind of the reasoning behind that case and the process and where it is right now in the litigation. I'll just briefly talk about our other litigation as well, and our other work. We, of course, have our Born Perfect project, and Shannon's going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. That's our project to fight conversion therapy. We also, of course, have our immigration and asylum project that we have had for decades. And we have our family law project, which is our work around the country to protect LGBTQ people and their families. In fact, I'll just mention really briefly one case that we have pending in Oklahoma that harkens back to NCLR's roots. Our client, Chris Williams, and her now estranged wife decided to use a sperm donor to have a child. They married before Chris's wife gave birth, and then they raised the child together. After 2 years, the marriage began to fall apart. Chris then encountered a horrifying situation in family court. The Oklahoma judge ruled in her case that because Oklahoma's parental law predates marriage equality, it does not protect same-sex married couples. And then the judge recognized the sperm donor as a parent and not our client, Chris. So this case is deeply important to our ongoing work to protect LGBTQ people and their families. If left to stand, this ruling violates Supreme Court rulings that we have already won related to marriage equality. So that case and our other project work is also pending around the country.
Thank you so much, Amy. And just for clarity, I just wanted to mention that the chat isn't open, but the Q&A is, and we can see all of your questions. So please go ahead and ask questions. Thanks again, Amy, for the overview of some of the cases that we're working on. I really appreciate it. Shannon, I want to move to you next. As Amy sort of foreshadowed in other news regarding the Supreme Court today, we got some news this morning, and SCOTUS is not going to hear one of the conversion therapy cases, and we have been waiting to see if they would take this case for at least 2 years now. So, if you can, could you break this down and explain what this means and what we can expect in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I'm so happy that we have some actually good news, some wonderful news this morning. The Supreme Court, after keeping us on pins and needles for months and months, has finally, excuse me, y'all, I'm losing my voice this morning. I'm doing my best here. Sorry about that. Has finally denied review of a Ninth Circuit decision that upheld Washington State's law protecting LGBT youth from conversion therapy. So this is, to say the very least, a huge victory. It is a major rebuff to the Alliance Defending Freedom, which brought the challenge. And as everybody I'm sure knows, is the largest and most well-funded anti-LGBT legal group. So we were really concerned the Supreme Court might take this case, which they generally don't do unless there's a good chance they're going to reverse the decision below, which would have been devastating. So this is a banner day. Now, that said, there is another case coming up out of Colorado that will give them another chance, potentially in a year or so. It's kind of, this is NCLR's involved in this Colorado case as well. We represent One Colorado as an amicus party defending Colorado's law. We won in the district court, and that case has now been appealed to the 10th Circuit. So we're not quite out of the woods entirely yet. So stay tuned on that. I just want to back up a little bit, though, and give a bigger picture, because I think, as many of you probably know, like NCLR has been very, very passionate about this issue of stopping conversion therapy for more than 30 years now. And in fact, you know, when I first started working at NCLR, which was literally 30 years ago this year, I came to NCLR as a new law school graduate to start a legal program for LGBT young people who'd been subjected to conversion therapy. That was the first program of any sort to give legal help to those kids. That issue at the time had like virtually very little visibility, and there were just almost no resources. So I'm really proud of the work that NCLR has done over these past 30 years to change that. So, you know, we now have about half the country has passed laws protecting kids from this very harmful practice. The voices of survivors have been lifted up and elevated, you know, through our survivor network, but many other, you know, avenues as well. The message that the medical community just unequivocally condemns and rejects these practices, I think, is now very well known. You know, one of our clients, a young woman from Utah named Alex, there was a very successful book written about her that was made into a Lifetime movie. There's been 2 other major motion pictures, Boy Erased and the Miseducation of Cameron Post, that NCLR got to consult on both of those movies. Our Born Perfect campaign has gained like enormous national, even international visibility. So I just wanted to remind us at this moment, when a lot of things are not going so well, we are still making progress in many areas. This is one of them. You all can help us with this, keep that momentum going by amplifying our messages, particularly like on social media from Born Perfect and NCLR. There's a bunch of positive ones today. It'd be great for you all to help, you know, push the good news out. I just want to mention we worked this year with Equality Utah to get the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the LDS Church, to support a law in Utah banning conversion therapy. That was extraordinary. It was remarkable. Like, what the heck, you know, and it just goes to show that we can, when we work with these conservative religious communities, we really can get them on board. And if anybody if you know any opportunities along those lines, please reach out to us. I was able this year to have a panel at an annual Religious Freedom Summit, one of the biggest ones in the country. Happens every year. They let me put on a whole panel about conversion therapy. Had somebody from the Dallas Theological Seminary, a very conservative seminary, speak to this largely conservative audience about why they oppose conversion therapy. So these are the kind of bridges we have to build and the kind of allies we need to cultivate to continue to make progress on this issue, and frankly, just about all the issues facing our community. So I wanted to take this chance to share that with you all.
Thank you so much, Shannon, for providing that perspective. And I also really always appreciate when we get to explain what's happening in real time. So really appreciate that update. Julie, I want to get to you next and get you in the conversation. So the expertise of NCLR shows up in more than just our litigation work. And I'm hoping that you can explain how some of our expertise shows up in the context of the work that you do and our importance here.
I'd be happy to. Thanks, Amani. And thank you all for being here today. I'm Julie Gonen. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm NCLR's Federal Policy Director here in Washington, D.C. And I do want to share with you some of our work that is a little bit less well known than some of our high profile cases that you've been hearing about for the last few minutes. So with litigation, when we do that, we're either using existing law to help someone whose rights are being denied, or we're in court challenging a law that's harmful and contrary to the Constitution. With our policy work, what we're trying to do is get good laws and policies enacted and also try to stop bad ones. So it's both proactive and defensive. Our work at the federal level really falls into 2 buckets. We work with Congress and we work with the executive branch, so whatever administration is in power. I'm going to start with the executive branch, in part because that's where positive things are actually happening right now. So picking up on Shannon's theme of, there is good stuff happening out there, even though we tend to hear a lot about the bad. So administrative advocacy, or working with the federal government, kind of lacks the drama of litigation, but it can be incredibly important anyway. Because when Congress passes laws, they pass statutes, they are sometimes somewhat vague, and the details of how they really apply to our lives are left to administrative agencies like the Department of Education or the Department of Health and Human Services. But those agencies can't just write rules with unfettered discretion. By law, they have to publish them in draft form first to give the public and those who would be affected by them a chance to weigh in. And this process is called filing comments. Again, it doesn't sound super sexy, but we file a lot of comments, and it's a really important place to be. I should also note, anybody can file a comment. In fact, some of you may have gotten messages from NCLR encouraging you to do so, because we want agencies to hear from people impacted by what they do. So we candidly did this a little bit more under the prior administration, when frankly, we wanted to flood them with comments and gum up the works. So it would take them longer to issue rules because they were uniformly terrible and harmful. But we also file comments when it's a good rule being proposed, because we want to help create a strong administrative record to support the rule if it's later challenged in court. And that happens more and more now. When we file comments as NCLR, the comments tend to be pretty long and detailed. They're kind of analogous to a brief that our litigators would file in a court case. We'll go into the legal grounding for the rule and also help the agency folks understand how it will affect our community, because there are actually other humans at the other end reading these comments before they issue the rule in its final form. And it's a way that we can really bring our expertise to bear in shaping federal policy. So just to give you a breadth or an idea of the breadth of the areas in which we filed comments just this year in 2023. So the Department of Education issued a rule, a really important rule, clarifying how Title IX applies to athletics and requiring the inclusion of transgender athletes. The Department of Health and Human Services rescinded a really bad rule that was issued under the prior administration that would have allowed all kinds of healthcare providers to deny care to people based on their religious beliefs. We weighed in when the FDA moved to finally revise after so many years, its blood donation policy to finally stop banning men who have sex with men from donating blood. There was another important rule from the Department of Health and Human Services expanding HIPAA privacy protections in the wake of last year's horrendous Dobbs decision around abortion care. They wanted to expand privacy protections for people seeking abortion care. So we weighed in and said, yes, this is great, do that, but also transgender medical care is being attacked in similar ways. And so we want the rule to be expanded to cover that kind of care as well. HHS also issued a rule expanding non-discrimination protections in its grant programs and expanding non-discrimination and protections and updating them for people with disabilities. So we could weigh in there and talk about how important that will be for LGBTQ people with disabilities. And there were a number of important rules in the child welfare space that I'll circle back to in just a second. But the upshot is, this really shows the importance of having a supportive administration in place where people are actively trying to move the ball forward to protect our community and many others. But I will say it's not always positive. There was earlier this year also a proposed rule out of the Biden administration that would have made it much harder for people seeking asylum in this country to actually achieve it. And because of the tremendous work of our immigration project over the years, we know how important asylum is for people who are fleeing gender-based violence in other countries. So we weighed in on that one too and said, no, this is a terrible idea. These rules are bad. So this administration mostly gets it right, but when they get it wrong, we don't let them off the hook. They need to hear that too. I wanted to say, circle back to the child welfare rules that I mentioned a moment ago. They deserve special mention, I think, for us, given NCLR's history and expertise in this area. These were several proposed rules that all came out around the same time. Made it a little hard for us because we had to really walk and chew gum there for a minute. Rules that would require safe and appropriate placements for LGBTQ youth in foster care, would give states more flexibility to use federal money to provide legal counsel for families facing system involvement, and that would update child support rules to be gender neutral and not just refer to paternity. So we were able to harness the expertise of folks like our family law attorney, Nesta Johnson, and our senior youth policy counsel, Danny King, who's right here with us on the screen, and you'll hear from in a minute, to weigh in really thoughtfully on these proposals and offer suggestions to strengthen them even further. So, we learned doing this work under President Obama that rules without broad public support and rock solid legal grounding get challenged, and sometimes we're blocked by the courts. This administration is being, frankly, more careful and strategic in how they go about this. And sometimes advocates, including us, can get frustrated by this because it takes longer and rules sometimes don't go as far as we would like. But it doesn't do anyone any good if the rules never take effect because they're struck down in court. So overall, I would say this administration is doing a really good job for our community, and we're playing our part to help get good policies in place. So that's the work that we're doing with the Biden administration. I want to pivot real quickly to Congress. That's the other bucket, the other place we work. And well, as for Capitol Hill, I will say it's a mess. It just is. But most people watching this probably already know that. They can't get full year spending bills passed. They're holding up aid to try to enact again, draconian changes to the asylum system. And believe me, they've heard from us on that. They booted their speaker on the House side, leading to the eventual election of Mike Johnson of Louisiana. A lot of people had no idea who that guy was until then, but unfortunately, we know all too well. More on that in a second. Because Congress is so dysfunctional, not a lot is happening in terms of legislation. Of course, we still pay attention and we work with friendly offices to shape bills, but nothing's really moving forward right now. So again, on the House side, the party in power has instead been using their majority status to hold shameful hearings to play to their base and attack our community. Just last week, a House subcommittee held a hearing that they called the importance of protecting female athletics in Title IX, but it was just a forum to grandstand and attack transgender people and rail against the participation of trans girls and women in sports. It's honestly such gaslighting to hear these anti-equality members of Congress act like they're the champions of women's empowerment and opportunity. So we provided the pro-equality members of the committee excerpts from the cases that we're litigating against sports bans in the states to equip them with what the courts around the country have said when striking those bans down. Now, this past summer, a different subcommittee, one chaired by now Speaker Mike Johnson, held a hearing attacking medical care for trans youth. And while hearings like this are largely political theater, they can signal that the party in power intends to move legislation in that area. So we have to respond when it happens. We have to help the pro-equality members on the committee prepare. We submit materials for the hearing record, and we recommend witnesses to testify. So who did our movement turn to in that moment to provide a witness who could go toe-to-toe with the likes of Matt Gaetz and Mike Johnson? None other than our own Shannon Minter. Shannon bravely testified about the benefits of medical care for trans youth and about the harms and dangers of bans. So I hope I'm not embarrassing Shannon, but I have to say he did a masterful job staying calm and reasonable with just the right whiff of disdain when they asked truly stupid questions. I think we have a clip from that hearing that we'd like to share just to give you a sense of what Shannon was up against and how well he did.
Is for Shannon Minter. Are you familiar with the changes in law recently in Washington State regarding transgender youth?
Yes.
And as I understand it, it used to be the case in Washington State that if a youth showed up at an emergency shelter, there was a legal requirement to notify the parent within 72 hours in the absence of some abuse or neglect. Is that your understanding of what the law was then?
I believe that is correct.
And then the law changed, where now in Washington State, if someone shows up to one of these shelters who's a minor and says that their parents don't agree with them changing their gender, that the shelter no longer has to notify the parents within 72 hours and can instead notify a government authority. Do I have that right?
The parents will be notified. There's no question about that. This simply allows for a delay in order to allow them to investigate to make sure this child is going to be safe. There's no question that the parents will be notified.
How long should parents have to wait, not knowing where their child is, while a government process is playing out to make a gender determination?
There's no reason to treat these situations with transgender young people who may be in danger or at risk of abuse at home any differently than we would treat any other child, where we have reasonable basis to worry about that and to investigate that.
But it does treat them
A
differently.
short delay to
Hold on,
protect the safety of young people is always
But
warranted.
how long is the delay? How long do you want a parent not knowing where their kid is because the kid says they want to change their gender? Just tell me how long a delay is you think is appropriate.
I want authorities to treat these kids with the same care they treat all other children.
but
And
that's-
it will be a short delay, and the parents
Hold on,
will be
though,
notified.
because
That was hard to sit through. I was sitting right behind Shannon, and I too had to try to keep a straight face during this, but you can see it was not easy, but it was wonderful that we had an opportunity to correct the record, really, and to address the questions coming from the other side, and then the better questions coming from the pro-equality side. So you may have seen there was another person in the screen there, Miriam Reynolds, the mother of a transgender son in Texas, also testified along with Shannon, and we may see her again before our time together is done today. So in addition to jetting around the country to protect the rights of our community in court, NCLR is also toiling away here in the nation's capital to try to move policy in the right direction.
Thank you so much, Julie. We don't often explain how important it is when we talk about the rules, the regulations that we had comments to, but they can have the same impact to individuals as laws do. So we want to be really thoughtful about that. It matters. And Shannon, I never get sick of listening to that. It is very hard to be in a situation like that. And we know, because we've seen all through, not just our movements, but all over, how hard those hearings can be. And just really appreciate your leadership here. You did a great job. And Shannon, I want to get back to you. So there's also a lot of work that NCLR does to just meet the moment. And so, for instance, our work in Florida is one that's pretty high profile, given the expanded press of one of our cases, the Don't Say Gay or Trans bill that's in Florida. But it's also true that NCLR does a lot of behind the scenes work. And we don't always talk about exactly what that is and what it does. Can you share with us some of the work that we do that's high profile or behind the scenes, and how it translates to real changes in LGBTQ access and equity?
Yeah, I love talking about this. These two strategies, we need both: a very public facing, aggressive, and a behind the scenes. Both of them are so important. Look, I hope everyone knows that that Florida is really ground zero in terms of attacks on our community right now. Florida has passed by far more anti-LGBT laws than any other state in the country, or any other state in this period of time in history. It's so many that it's almost becomes impossible to summarize it at this point. They passed the first new version of Don't Say Gay or Trans. They banned medical care for minors. They're the first state to pass a law restricting medical care for transgender adults. They have banned transgender people from using public restrooms. They have stopped teachers and students, transgender teachers and students, from referring to themselves by the appropriate pronouns or names in school. They criminalized drag shows. They have banned gender studies and race studies in Florida universities. They're now stopping people in Florida from changing their transgender people from correcting their birth certificates. It's incredible. So in our opinion, as an organization, it is critical that our movement focus resources on Florida. We have got to try to stop this in its tracks. They're focused, the other side is focusing their resources there. We need to meet them and cut this off. So NCLR is doing, I hope, at least our fair share, maybe even more than our fair share in Florida, because it's so important. Sorry, Amani, as you noted, we filed almost immediately a challenge to that Don't Say Gay or Trans law. It's the first challenge filed in the country. We have succeeded in getting a preliminary injunction stopping the medical ban for minors. 2 days from now, Wednesday, we start our trial in Florida, in federal court in Florida, challenging those adult restrictions. We're working with Florida practitioners on trying to figure out what to do about those birth certificates. We have partnered very closely with Equality Florida, a phenomenal organization. They have been so responsive and so effective, and such great leaders in this moment on all kinds of, especially policy efforts and public education and community organizing efforts. And it is because of all of this that we are going to locate our 2024 Rural Pride program in Florida. You know, it's a great event. We put it on every year. We've had events all across the country to try to organize people in rural areas of various states and share resources and information. Where we're going to do it really big next year in Florida. So, you know, that's the Florida public facing strategy. Also, though, the flip side of Florida is, and I've alluded to this already, a behind the scenes strategy to build human face-to-face relationships with as many conservative leaders and institutions as possible. I've heard some people say, criticize that strategy, say, oh, that's so naive. They're never going to change their mind. I will tell you something. What is naive, what is actually truly naive, is failing to understand there is no substitute for personal contact and personal relationships, and just no question that having them makes it considerably more difficult for people to support laws and policies that dehumanize us. It just does. Now, is this a silver bullet? No, of course not. Does it make a huge difference? Hell yes, it absolutely does. I've seen that over and over. And that's why for the past 8 years, NCLR has partnered with the NCAA on our Common Ground program, which brings together conservative religious colleges and universities, the coaching staff, leadership now from those organizations, with LGBT advocates to talk about how they treat LGBT student athletes. It spills over into how they treat all LGBT students. There have been incredible, phenomenal change policies and practices and culture, change institutional culture results from that. That's why for the past 5 years, I have participated in a wonderful program called Dialogue Means Tolerance, where I go around to all these religious colleges and universities, partnered with a conservative law professor, and we model what respectful dialogue means. These are places we would never be able to get into otherwise, and audiences we would never otherwise be able to reach. It's why NCLR is the only LGBT group on the National Advisory Committee of a very prominent national religious freedom conference every year. That's where I was able to have that conversion therapy panel that I talked about earlier. It's why we have partnered with the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities to help them educate their member schools about LGBT students and people. I just really want to share this with you all because we don't get a chance too often, and also put a plug in for it. If you have opportunities where you are to engage in this kind of dialogue, please do it. And I wanted to say, I've learned a lot over like past pretty much 10 years of doing this. I would be so happy to talk with anybody about kind of pitfalls and how to do it and how to make it work anytime. So I hope that I will hear from some of you about that, about trying this where you live. Okay.
Thank you so much, Shannon. And I really appreciate just how you put that. It's so important that we work with folks that don't think like us. This is the work. We need folks that are going to be fighting for us when we're not in those rooms, and that's how we're going to get to justice. So thank you so much for talking about the importance of that work. Danny, I want to move to you and get you in this discussion. Much of the work that you do is around child welfare and juvenile justice work. And as many folks know, NCLR is also a racial justice organization. Can you talk about how we live up to that title, what work we're doing there, and how you're thinking through the work that you're doing in this moment?
Yeah, thank you, Amani, and thank you everyone for being here. I think Julie gave a really good overview about how our policy work is overall, and how it functions. A lot of my work is on the state level in our policy advocacy. And so in terms of legislative advocacy, I work in coalition with multiple organizations, work frequently with Equality California, Human Rights Watch, to make sure that we are supporting and participating, sometimes even co-sponsoring LGBTQ related bills, as well as education, general juvenile justice bills, and child welfare bills overall. In California, there's a number of bills that passed this year in this legislative session that I think are worth mentioning, especially for the folks who are here in California, just to know what advancements, which were many, one of which the Safe and Supportive Schools Act, which is going to require an hour of LGBTQ competency training for all teachers and staff who teach grades 7 through 12 for the next 5 years. It's going to be, the compliance is going to be tracked annually to make sure that it's actually occurring. In terms of child welfare, there was a recent bill, SB 407, which requires that all potential foster families have to make sure that they're meeting needs of children, regardless of their sexual orientation and gender identity. I mean, we can have a whole conversation just about that issue, but this stems from work that we have done with different community organizations that have mentioned foster youth who have went through the system and who have had issues in their foster homes and not feeling safe and supported. And, as a former foster youth myself, I know how important it is and how, going through the foster care system is challenging enough, but then to face additional challenges while you're there is extremely difficult. So glad to see that this bill was something that got to be passed in California. In terms of public schools in California, now they are required to have at least one all-gender restroom for students. Also, there's a LGBTQ education task force that will soon be convened by the superintendent of public instruction. And so what's good about that task force is it's going to be students as well as teachers and faculty administrators to work together to create an inclusive environment for LGBTQ students. And a lot of the work that I get to do is on the more proactive and kind of positive end to kind of supplement some of the work that we do here in thinking of ways that how could we be supportive of bills that are trying to make things better for youth going through these systems. One bill that we were in coalition with the Human Rights Watch AB 505 was extremely important for youth in the juvenile justice system. There was a prior requirement of 48 hours notice before a newly created ombudsman would be able to investigate any reports from young people. And in our prior coalition work in 2022, we know that a lot of those complaints had to do with restroom access, other hygiene, medical access that require immediate attention. And so through this bill getting passed, the ombudsman that investigates these reports, much like the foster care ombudsman, will now have immediate access for young folks in facilities. And in terms of re-entry programs in California now, there was a recent bill that passed, AB 1487, that is going to be developing and distributing funding for community-based organizations to support TGI re-entry programs, which we know, and this is definitely connected to the intersectionality in our work, that a lot of transgender, non-conforming, intersex individuals, when they're exiting the criminal justice system, juvenile justice system, there's not enough funding and support for reentry, and they face particular barriers when it comes to employment and housing. And so having funding that particularly address this and is going to provide support for this population is so extremely important. And also in California, they're going to be changing and revising public use forms to make sure that they're collecting data and have taking down basically more information on transgender, non-conforming, and intersex people in their forms to make sure that they're better meeting the needs of the population. And in terms of with child welfare and removal of young folks, there is going to be more requirements for courts to weigh the known harms that a child will experience from removal and making sure that they are mitigating those harms if a child has to be removed. So basically putting more care into determining whether or not a child should be removed for their family and figuring out, are there supports and ways that they can avoid removing before that happens. In New York, what recently passed this year, a safe haven for transgender youth and families. This is very similar to what was passed in California, but basically making sure that folks who come to New York from out of state, who want to make sure that their child has gender affirming care, are able to do so if they're coming from states where that's particularly prohibited. In other policy advocacy that I'm a part of, I serve as on the executive steering committee for the California Board of State Community Corrections. And in this role, I get to participate in the revisions of Title 15 and Title 24 to ensure that the juvenile regulations that govern facilities in California are particularly as, and this sounds, funny for juvenile facilities, because the hope is that there'll be less young folks that are locked up, but trying to make sure that there's ways that we can improve these regulations, especially for youth of color and LGBTQ youth. And we're going to be continuing our final revisions in early 2024. And in terms of education work, I participated in number of presentations, Lavender Law and Stonewall National Education Project. And with that Stonewall project, what is particularly interesting about that symposium that I presented at is that it was particularly for educators who want to make the environment supportive for LGBTQ students. And so it was good to be in the room and get to talk to educators who were trying to help young folks across the country. And we engaged in amicus support the last few months, particularly on a lot of the forced outing policies in California. And NCLR just recently joined the Advancing Racial Equity Alliance, which is organized by NAACP, Legal Defense Fund, Asian Americans Advancing Justice, Latino Justice, Pro-Def, and National Women's Law Center. And we're looking forward to be able to take an intersectional approach to addressing racial equity, especially given the recent Supreme Court decisions and book bans, curriculum bans.
Thank you so much, Danny. And thank you so much to all of you for letting us share our work and our strategy with you. It's important that you know that our work is strategic, it's intersectional, and it's intentional. Doing all this work together the way that we do it makes it stronger. And we wanted you to see that. We're getting toward the end of our program, and I wanted to take some time to talk about what's next. One of the questions is, what can we do? And Julie was going to share with us some things that folks can do as individuals or within organizations about what we can do next.
It's a big question, but I think I would say in a nutshell, don't turn away. It's tempting when there's so much hate and negative news. It's tempting to turn away and tune it out. I struggle with this. Sometimes I don't want to talk about the work that I do even at dinner parties because I deal with it all day long. And sometimes you just don't want to think about it anymore, but we have to stay engaged. And above all else, this is going to sound maybe kind of trite and obvious, but we have to vote. As awesome as we are, we can't assume that bad laws that get passed will be fixed in court if we file a lawsuit. A lot of them will, because we're good and our partner organizations are good, but we can't be everywhere. And particularly because of all of the judges, frankly, that the prior administration was able to appoint, we can't assume that we can just go into court and fix it. So we have to elect fair-minded, pro-equality people into office at all levels. And I want to kind of underline that. I talked about Congress earlier, how important it is to have a pro-equality president and administration. That's essential. But these days, school board and other local elections can be the most important places for you to show up, maybe even run yourselves. And if you get a message from us asking you to comment on a rule, please do that, because we want the administration to hear from you too, not just from, the wonks who, like me, who do it for a living, but they need to hear from you. Like, how does this affect you in your daily life? We can't let the other side's relentless hostility silence and discourage us and lead us to disengage. As Amani said at the beginning of our conversation today, most people are with us, or they can be if they are engaged. And Shannon spoke very eloquently a moment ago about how important that is and the important work he's doing in some spaces you wouldn't have imagined. So stay in there, talk to your neighbors, engage in your community, and know that we are right there with you, fighting the good fight to ensure that we continue to move forward and not backwards.
Thank you so much, Julie. It's important that we realize there's always something that we can do, and we always have to be doing something. It is going to take all of us. I want to thank all of you for joining us. We are most certainly in difficult times, but we do have a plan for getting ahead, and we're honored to be in partnership with each of you. Like I teased earlier, NCLR embarked on our largest public education campaign of its kind in the history of NCLR this year. And so working with Edelman, after researching 500 folks that identify as moderate or centrist, Edelman discovered that 74% of people believe that parents want what's best for their children. And this is when it comes to medical care. But we know that the parents of trans kids often face an uphill battle when trying to get their kids the care that they need. Transgender healthcare is recognized by standard of care in every single major medical association. This includes the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and every single major medical association. This care has been provided to transgender adolescents for decades. The treatments are safe, they're effective, and these same treatments have been prescribed for other related medical conditions that non-transgendered youth have taken. This is incredibly safe. Even so, nearly 2.5 million young trans and non-binary people currently are facing the reality that they'll lose access to this care. Through the voices of transgender youth in the form of thank you letters to their parents, the Healthcare is Caring campaign dispels inaccurate and harmful myths, showcasing the positive impact of ensuring safe, long-lasting, necessary care is available to parents that want to provide healthy and fulfilling life for their trans kids. So again, this is the largest video campaign of its kind at NCLR. Edelman contributed nearly $600,000 of pro bono and donated income to this project. This research is some of very little of its kind. It's going to be used over and over by our movement partners. And in this new year, we're looking to get about 100K of additional funds to go towards pushing out this campaign in front of 8.5 million people. So this is going to be enormous. And this is a move that NCLR is making to contribute to the culture change and narrative shift work that is going to help us win in the courts. We're so proud of this video and hope that you are too. And if you could go ahead and cue up the video.
The night I came out to you as transgender, I wrote you a letter. What was I gonna do? Sit there and speak to you? Face to face?
I was 11. You and I were in an argument. I don't fully remember what it was about, but we were screaming at each other, and I yelled back. Maybe it's because I want to be a boy.
Would you react with confusion, fury, love?
I remember when you weren't so sure if it was just a phase, but no matter what, you supported me.
You walked back into my room and sat on my bed and talked to me about what I said and how I felt and how you could help me.
I had never felt so loved in my life. You helped me choose my name.
You gave me the power to choose who I wanted to be, fighting to make sure that I had access to healthcare.
You wanted to make a difference.
You knew it was what I wanted, and you put my happiness before yours.
But here I am, writing a letter, trying to find the words to tell you how much you really mean to me. I love you, Luke.
Love, Allie.
I love you, Cameron.
Thank you so much. We have an immense amount of pride in this video. We've gotten so many compliments. And it's a reminder that of what we already know, and that sometimes that even when you don't know what the right thing to do is, just showing up and trying gets you further than you think. And I think this also gets at one of the questions in the chat, and that is how can we fight disinformation? And that is, let's put out real information. You know, if you see this, if you go to our website, nclrights.org, this is the first thing that comes up. And there's also a link of what we call accurate news sources. And you can find out things that are not, we know that part of our opponents, what they're doing is looking at creating this misinformation and disinformation. That's intentional, and so passing on information like this and accurate accounts of what's happening to folks is going to be something that changes. But we're seeing that show up in a whole different, in a lot of different ways. This video, we know it's going to have, I think most people on this call knows the effect of having supportive parents, like what that impact can have on us. And this video will serve as an inspiration for folks that need that. And so as much as you can share out this video, we would really appreciate that because we want to get it in front of as many people as possible. But this video is also coming at a time when Netflix just released a short film on the parents of LGBTQ kids. And many of our community partners are doing narrative shift work as well. And so right now, there are things out there. So we are working to change the culture. And remember, most folks think like us and they want to think like us. They just need to have access to this. So share these things, put out this accurate news information, just so folks know what's out there and what's honest. And then lastly, I just want to say, because it is the end of the year, I want to remind you to make your gift to NCLR. We are small for a national organization, but we have an enormous footprint. We are the biggest bang for your buck, leading the movement in impact litigation, supporting thoughtful, strategic legislation. We're changing the game with our public education campaigns and our work with rural communities, supporting economic justice, helping LGBTQ folks immigrate and seek asylum in this country, among so many other things. Some of us have to fight for our rights, and your gifts let us do that, and it helps us to create a better world for everyone. And for those of you that have already made your gift to NCLR, thank you so much. And I hope that you, like me, will consider making another. And I'm going to make another today, and I hope that you'll join me. We've never needed it more. And again, NCLR is a great bang for your buck. Thank you so much for being part of the NCLR family, and we look forward to getting closer to free together. Thanks.